You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I'm your host, Steph. It is Friday, August 18th. The 49ers are a day away from taking the field for their second preseason game against the Broncos. But there's something else happening soon, and that's the Pro Football Hall of Fame voting. Joining me to discuss why a certain former 49er should be voted in is Marc Adams, writer for 49ers Webzone, and you've probably come across his podcast on YouTube, 49ers Camelot. How you doing today, Marc?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. I'm happy to have you on and excited to talk about your series and, of course, the second preseason game as well.
Yeah, it's a fun time, when you're a football fan and they start coming back to training camp and then the preseason games start. That's fun, but the real fun starts on September 10th. That's when it really gets real.
For sure. And we'll talk more about the preseason game in a bit, but Marc, you have this amazing series that I want to talk about in this awesome podcast. And one thing I noticed as soon as you came out with your podcast is that you had amazing guests. And sometimes it takes some people a while to gain that those kinds of guests, but you just came right out with it. And I remember you had, I believe it was like Matt Barrows, and you've had some other good guests as well. But yeah, I mean, I am probably like a B-list, C-list guest compared to the rest. But what made you want to start your podcast?
My podcast in general, I had been writing for 49ers Webzone for about a year and started having people say, hey, you need to start doing a podcast. And I fought it for probably a good year because to me, it just seemed like way too much work. I was fine going on other people's podcasts, but when it was over, I got to leave and I didn't have to do anything else. And I know that they still had work that they had to do. And so that was one reason I fought it. But the other reason was that there are so many incredible 49ers content creators. And so I was like, why would anybody want to listen to me? Because there's so many good ones out there. And I just didn't feel like we needed another 49ers podcast. And so when I finally decided to do it, it was only that, hey, I'm gonna try to do things a little differently. Like a lot of the ones that I would go on to would just be conversations. And so I wanted to do it a little more interview type, and realizing that people aren't going to tune in for me. That's just what I think. But maybe they will tune in for really good guests. And so that's kind of been my focus. And so that's, I like I said, I fought it, but ultimately I had enough people encouraging me, some people that I really respect. And so I finally just decided I'm going to do it, and I'm going to stick with it for a year and see after that year if it's anything worth continuing.
Well, I do definitely appreciate your format and like the more interview style. I think it is unique compared to a lot of the other 49ers podcasts that are out there. And I mean, I think you've noticed too, you've had some success with this podcast, right? So I think you should definitely keep on with it. And I'm glad you're out here doing your thing. But I know you just wrapped up and released a big project in which you got some, A+ list guests to join you in making the Hall of Fame case for Roger Craig. It's a 4-part series, and you had Matt Mayoko, Larry Krueger, Ronnie Lott, and Steve Young join you in helping make this case. And that's an impressive bunch. So, how long had this been in the works for you?
Well, the series is based on a story that I released through 49ers Webzone in February of 2022. And that project I had been working on for probably, I would say, 6 months. And I had the bulk of the series written or that story written. It's just that I was getting people like Joe Montana. He was part of that, and Steve Young, and most everybody I got pretty quick. But Joe and Steve, it took a long time for me to hook up with them. I mean, understandably so.
Yeah.
But that one started back in August, and so all the way to February. This one, I would say that we started this probably February of this year, and just decided because I wrote the story, and then Roger still didn't get in 2022, so I decided, okay, I'm gonna follow that with a video series, podcast series, and see if that makes a bigger impact. So I know that people these days watch and listen a lot more than they read. So that was my hope, is that this is more likely to get eyeballs in front of it, and more likely to get Hall of Fame voters to actually watch or listen than to read. And so that's kind of where we started in February. And I just reached out to all of the guys that I worked with on the story, and they were all really willing to be part of this. And so Montana wasn't able. We never could hook up, but he's doing some behind the scenes work right now, because even though the podcast series is out, when I sent it to the Hall of Fame voters, and when they got it, 2 of them wrote me and said, "This is great, but we'd love to see some video of players that Roger played against endorsing him." And so at that point, I've been working some with this lady named Valerie, who's at Eddie DeBartolo's office. So she and Mr. DeBartolo, Matt Mayoko, a guy named Kirk Reynolds, who used to be with the 49ers, and Carmen Policy, Ronnie Lott's been doing some work, started reaching out to a lot of these players. Because if I reach out to somebody, a Mike Singletary or somebody like that, I'm nobody. So like, it's going to be hard for me to get them to do something like this. But if Ronnie Lott reaches out to those guys, then they're going to return that call. They're probably going to do what they're asked. And so I found out yesterday that Montana is doing some work as well, that he's contacting some Hall of Fame voters and trying to persuade. And so I think that we have a really good chance. And if it doesn't happen, and we should find out either Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, if it doesn't happen, we already have a plan B for what we're going to try next year. So yeah, that was that. And that was the whole premise, is that if I stand before a Hall of Fame voter and say, "Hey, vote for Roger Craig," like, who are you? Who cares? But if Steve Young does it, it carries so much more weight and value that's why I had to get those guys on.
And what does I guess, like, Roger Craig and his career mean to you specifically, that you felt so strongly to want to put this together in the first place?
Well, he was a critical part of 3 Super Bowl championships. I mean, they had won 1 before he came. In the second one, he scored 3 touchdowns in that game, and was the first player in NFL history to score 3 touchdowns in a Super Bowl. And so you look at the other 2. I don't remember what he did in Super Bowl 24, because that one they scored 55 points. So I think that everybody scored in that game, it seemed. But in Super Bowl 23, he had a big game. He had some real, that drive, the John Candy drive, where Montana let him down for the game winning touchdown to John Taylor. Roger Craig had some critical catches for first down conversions on that drive. And so, and then he's just a really nice guy. But his numbers, from a rushing standpoint, from what I understand, one of the Hall of Fame voters that I interviewed told me that for years there was this magical number, like 10,000. You had to reach 10,000 yards rushing to get into the Hall, and Rodgers under that. And but you can't judge him just off of Hall of Fame, or just off of rushing yards, because he did so much more than that. I mean, here, listen to this. He had more more receptions and more receiving yards than John Stallworth, who's a wide receiver in the Hall of Fame from the Pittsburgh Steelers of the 70s. So more receiving yards and more catches than a Hall of Fame receiver. I think that if Roger Craig was a receiver instead of a running back, he'd already be in. But so he has these great stats. I mean, everybody knows the first 1,000, but he actually had 2 seasons that he went over 2,000 yards in that season. So he didn't do the 1,000, but just, over 2,000 total yards from scrimmage. So the guy was just critical. He changed the game. And that was what Steve Young said in the series, is that if you look at what Roger Craig did, I mean, you can look at where we are now with, you've got guys like Derrick Henry, who is one of the only I backs remaining. And Steve said that position, or how that position is used, the I back part of the position, is being phased out. And the running back position is becoming more and more like a McCaffrey type person. And so if you look at McCaffrey, LaDainian Tomlinson, Marshall Faulk, those kinds of running backs, it all started with Roger Craig. And what Steve said is, if you change the game and you change a position, you should be in the Hall of Fame. And he actually said the NFL and the Hall of Fame needs to pay that off and put Roger Craig in where he belongs.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely ahead of his time. And what I find most impressive about all of this is that, all these guys, these former teammates, coming together to really, rally for him to get into the Hall of Fame. I think that just speaks to like the brotherhood that these guys, were able to build in the years that they play together, and how much this means to them. Because, these guys already have their Hall of Fame, and they're trying to help their teammate now get to that point. So when does the voting take place?
Takes place on Tuesday.
Okay.
And I asked Matt Mayoko, are we going to find out Tuesday? And he said, possibly it'll either be late Tuesday or Wednesday that we'll find out. It just kind of depends how long their meeting is, when they decide to let the word out, or however that goes. And so it could be Wednesday, but hopefully, and it's just not just teammates, because right now, like I said, there's things going on behind the scenes. I was texting with Matt last night that he's actually doing Zoom calls where they're recording these short, impactful videos of these players that played against Roger in the 80s. So, and there's a long list of them that they're supposedly going to be meeting with. So these are also not only his teammates, but players that played against him that are jumping on board and working together. So he's got a great chance. If it doesn't happen, then it's going to be really disappointing, but we're not going to give up.
Yeah, for sure. Well, if he does make it in, I think like what you, along with, Steve Young, Montana, Mayoko, all you guys have been putting together collectively, it definitely would help him get there, right? So let's keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully he gets in, because he definitely deserves it. And then next, maybe the next project is who is it? Patrick Willis, who's on the docket as well. So hopefully he can make it soon enough too.
Yeah, and I think that he will. And he's still in the regular Hall of Fame class area, however they put it, where Roger Craig's now in the senior division. Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, one of the Hall of Fame voters said this. I don't remember who it was, but one of them said that the sad part is that when you phase out of the main part of the Hall of Fame candidates into the senior section, so to speak, that your chances go way down of ever getting in. And so that's we've seen how it's taken a long time just for him to reach the final 12. But from what I understand, on Tuesday, they take the final 12. Each of those 12 candidates has a voter who's going to present their case. And right now it sounds like Roger not only has a voter that's going to present his case, but based on what I'm hearing from Mr. D's office, is that there are going to be, after that, numerous voters that stand up and say, yes, here's why I believe he should be in. And I don't know if that's very common or uncommon. I don't know, but these Hall of Fame voters have been receiving calls from people like Joe Montana and Ronnie Lott. And so I'm sure they took those calls, because I certainly would. But the thing that that I think that we want to focus on is that it would be great to have this happen while he's still alive, because we recently saw Ken Stabler get into the Hall of Fame, but he'd already passed away. And so, and that's one of the things that one of the voters told me in the interview, is that's really sad. It's great for his family, but it's sad that he missed out on his own enshrinement. And so we need this to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm definitely even learning a lot about the Hall of Fame voting process, and just speaking, I'm sure you have too, because most of that isn't like public knowledge, I feel like.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely interesting how that works. It seems like there's a lot of politicking in the background that happens to get these guys in. So, yeah, it seems like not only does Roger Craig have a great case just based on his game, his play, but also from former teammates, former opponents, right? So hopefully this is the year. But Mark, the 49ers, they have a preseason game happening tomorrow, actually, against the Broncos. So we should talk a little about that as well. And I mean, based on how the game against the Raiders went, last week, I know what people were thinking. It wasn't a great showing. Oh my God, let's panic about some of these depth
Yeah.
guys, and oh my God, if there's an injury to any of them, we're screwed. So I mean, I'm not on the let's panic train, but obviously there's some things that need to improve in this second preseason game as we head closer to week 1. And I think one of the battles that I'm looking for, one of those like bubble guys potentially that I'm looking at, or positions as a whole, nickel. What's happening at the nickel position? Isaiah Oliver has fallen off a bit. Who's going to be the guy that maybe steps up? Maybe Isaiah Oliver ends up stepping up, right? Since he's got a fire under his butt now. So I don't know. Is that one position that you're kind of looking at too in this game?
Oh, absolutely. Because I was really surprised when he started that game against the Raiders, and because the starting defense wasn't playing. So I was like, okay, so Cleveland Farrell is starting out there. No big deal with that, because I think they probably want to see what they have in him. But I was surprised that Isaiah Oliver was starting. And then when he kept getting picked on by a rookie quarterback starting his first game, I started going, oh gosh, would it be possible to trade for Jimmy Ward, or whatever? But again, I don't want to overreact, because it's just one stinking preseason game. But I think that if that would have been, for example, if that would have been Jimmy Ward kind of butchering that game, then none of us would even think a thing about it. But it was because it was a player playing in his very first game with the 49ers, and we don't really know him that well. I think that that's why, for like with me, I was like, okay, I'm a little concerned about this, but it is just one game. Let's see how that happens, how things go this week. So yeah, going to be interesting to see. I mean, I saw that Diamador Lenore was playing some nickel in practice. I don't know who else did. I thought maybe they put Womack there because he started the season at nickel last year, but I think that they like him on the outside, I guess. But
yeah, it seems like it. And I like Lenore on the outside too. I don't know if I would really mess around with that rotation. I understand like they want to get their 11 best guys on the field. Like that's what they talk about when, the nickel position and all that. But I don't know. Lenore did a pretty great job on the outside, so I don't know if I'd mess with that. Ambry Thomas is another intriguing name, just because it seems like he's maybe turned a corner since, last year was a bit of a struggle for him. So I think we see a bit of Ambry in tomorrow's game. And I don't know if he'll be on the outside just because obviously Lenore and Mooney Ward aren't going to play. So maybe by
Yeah.
necessity he might play on the outside. But I'd like to see him get some reps at nickel if he really is in contention for that spot, as well as Samuel Womack. And let's not forget Deshaun Jameson, who has come along pretty quickly here with this team as a UDFA, and he's been impressive, right? So I think he can make a case in these last 2 preseason games because he looked good in last game against the Raiders on return duty. And I know he was someone who had been impressing in practice as well. So going to be keeping an eye on all 3 of those guys, Thomas, Womack, and Jameson, I think.
Do you think that that Ward and Lenore, you think that they're not going to play at all?
I don't know, actually. I mean, because I know in the first preseason game, obviously, none of the starters really started. But I don't know what the plan is for this game. I mean, I'm hearing that it seemed like Kyle Shanahan was on the fence on Brock playing, and the closer we get, it feels like that door is opening a little bit more for Brock to potentially play. So I don't know, maybe we do see more starters for a series or 2 in this one. I think that would be interesting. So I wouldn't mind it. And I think if they did do that, that would give them the opportunity to then, in a real game situation before week 1, be able to experiment with some of those rotations of maybe having Lenore at nickel or Ambry at nickel and whatnot.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah, I think he said on KNBR yesterday that maybe. It sounds like he still hasn't made up his mind if he wants starters out there. If he doesn't play them this week, because last year, didn't he play the starters in the second of the 3 preseason games?
I believe so, yeah. And my thing is, it's kind of backwards because I feel like the 3rd game should be the game because it's closer to week 1.
Yeah.
That should be your dress rehearsal. And I think it's a little funky now because now the roster cuts don't happen until after all of the preseason games. So it's possible you've made your decisions on the bubble guys before that 3rd game potentially. But I would like to get the starters some run, before week 1. And I think the 3rd preseason game makes the most sense to be that dress rehearsal and get those guys their snaps.
Yeah.
But with Brock and him coming back from injury and, him ramping up, all this offseason, I think it would be beneficial for him to, get a little more extra time to acclimate before week 1, because week 1 is a tough matchup and I want him to be ready. I don't want him having any rust. There's a lot of talk about Brock having rust at the beginning of camp, and it seems like he's shaking that off for the most part. But as we know, playing in an actual game is a little bit different than practice, right? And especially in that week 1 game, I could assume there's going to be a lot of pressure. So I want him to just get back into the swing of an actual game, in these preseason games. So hopefully we see him out there tomorrow, a small bit. Don't want him out there too long. And maybe in the 3rd preseason game too, he can handle a series or 2.
Yeah. And not only that, but Kyle's team tends to start slow in the, except for 2019, and the Steelers start fast. So I think they're 15-1 in their last 16 opening day games. So they don't lose on opening day, and the 49ers are slow out of the gate. So that's a little bit of a concern. So I really agree with you that that 3rd game would probably be, in my estimation, the best one. But maybe all the coaches like to go with that middle game and decide from there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like most coaches just go with whatever everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems like there are going to be some starting quarterbacks who get some run in these 2nd week preseason games. So we'll see. So hopefully we'll see him out there. Look, another guy that did not impress me in the Raiders game that I'm going to be keeping an eye on in this one is Javon Kinlaw. Not to say that he's on the bubble or anything, but I think you strongly consider where he's at in your pecking order. Is there someone who looks better than him as far as the depth guys go? There's not a ton of depth for like his position at the 2I, but I think, I don't know. Based on what I saw, I'm a little nervous for him to, rotate with Javon Hargrave. I just feel like that drop off is just going to be so noticeable,
Yeah.
and I don't want teams like exploiting Javon Kinlaw being out there and running right at him, because I could, based on what we saw on tape, like that's what I would do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what's going to happen. And when they see him in there, they're not going to run at Hargrave. They're going to run it, but they are going to run at Kinlaw. And, for me, like if something happened to Hargrave or Armstead right now, I'm more comfortable with Kevin Givens than I am with Javon Kinlaw. And I hope that Kinlaw does, has a great year. But man, I'm not super confident with him right now.
Yeah, and I mean, staying on the defensive side of things, Trey Greenlaw, Oren Burks, dealing with injury right now, minor injury. They should be ready to go for week 1, but I think this is a great opportunity for some of these younger linebackers to really show what they can do, right? I mean, Jalen Graham impressed in that game against the Raiders. D. Winters made some plays as well. These guys are quick, sideline to sideline guys. And McCrary Ball was a guy who, last year was kind of on that same trajectory as well. I think I want to see a little more out of him in this game. But I think it's a great opportunity for those guys, and I'm really excited because the 49ers know how to draft linebackers, and anyone who they bring in, it's like an exciting piece to the puzzle. Right. And Oren Burks dealing with that injury, if one of these guys, blows them out of the water, who knows? Maybe they could make that decision tough, and maybe they can take on that Aziz third linebacker spot.
Yeah, I actually predicted a few weeks ago, that Marcelino McCurry Ball would be that third starting linebacker. And because I thought Oren Burks would be more of a special teams ace. And so then I predicted that McCurry Ball would be the guy, and that by the end of the season, D. Winters would take over that. Now, since then, I've heard all this about Oren Burks, and so I'm probably wrong yet again, but that's all right. But yeah, I really have been impressed with D. Winters, but even more so with Jalen Graham, not only because of what he did in the preseason game and what he was doing in training camp, but I heard Matt Barrows say that they've been lining him up a lot in training camp at a middle linebacker position, and that never happens with rookies because it's just too much for them. But the Jalen Graham has caught on so quickly, and they seem to trust him with that information that they're putting him at middle linebacker. So that sounds really promising. And I don't remember if Fred Warner did that as a rookie, but that was one of the things that we heard about Fred Warner, is that he's really smart and he catches on quick, and he's going to be a leader of the defense. And so this was before he started showing all of the incredible talent that he has. It was his mind that was going to make him really good. And then his talent caught up with his mind. And so I'm just wondering if Jalen Graham might be another one like that.
Yeah, I think he's definitely surprised people. I don't think anyone really expected him to catch on so quickly as he has. I think everyone thought D. Winters, he was drafted in the 5th round. He's probably going to look good right out of the gate. And he has. But Jalen Graham, I think, has played at times even better than D. Winters.
Yeah.
I mean, not that it's a big competition between the two of them right now, but I think it's great for this team that both of those guys are playing well. So really exciting. I think they should both of those guys could probably make the 53. I'm assuming.
Yeah, I hope so. And with the way that Dre Greenlaw plays, he tends to miss some time because he plays with such reckless abandon and just throws himself all over the place. So it's likely that Greenlaw is going to get nicked up and miss a handful of plays or maybe a game or two here and there. So you need some guys like Winters or Graham to be able to step up.
Yeah, and they're calling Winters like the baby Greenlaw or something like that.
Yeah.
So they're very, very similar body types and the style of
Hmm.
play. So yeah, I think they'd want to keep D Winters around. But let's talk about the offensive line, because I think that's where I'm like, I'm not sure like who makes the cut here, because I think there's a lot of like bottom of the line guys, but some of those bottom of the line guys have kind of impressed. And one of those guys being Il Manning, who we've been hearing about.
Yeah.
And I know, Brad put out a ton of clips on just Il Manning, like, cooking people on the offensive line. And he was out there like probably towards the end of the game. But I think based on what he did, he probably deserves to get put a little bit earlier in the game just to see how he'll fare with slightly better, players. And so, on the other hand, I think there were some guys who started that game and, probably as like the second unit, right? Because none of the starters started, who I think underperformed and should probably go in later in the game. Like I'm not impressed with Matt Pryor. I understand that he has experience. He's a veteran. And so I see why they might like him in that case, but he doesn't look like a guy to me that impressed anyone. And Nick
Yeah.
Zakelj definitely
Mm.
struggled out there too. So I don't know. I'd be tempted to take him a notch down too,
Hmm.
and maybe you bring Il Manning up to Leroy Watson, another tackle who I think is pretty solid. So I think they got some good tackles. Jalen Moore, again, another guy who has gotten the opportunities, but in those opportunities just hasn't really done enough to like impress anyone. So I don't know. I think they're going to continue to give Jalen Moore those opportunities until the wheels fall off, which I don't know, could be at roster cut down. Who knows?
Yeah.
But some of these other tackles are kind of impressing, at least.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually had some notes because I did a mailbag for 49ers Webzone, so I had notes from that that Leroy Watson one pressure on 24 quarterback dropbacks, Il Manning 0 pressures, and Keith Ishmael 0 pressures on 29 pass blocks. I mean, that's pretty impressive. Now he probably played a lot later. I'm guessing. I don't even remember him being in the game, so I don't know when he played, but I'm guessing it was late.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wrote down like the Zakel, he was garbage. 4 quarterback pressures. Jalen Moore, and this is the thing that scares me, is that Jalen Moore was the presumed, before he got hurt, he was the presumed swing tackle. And so not only are we putting our hopes on Colton McKivitz, who, was what, a couple of years ago was cut, or was that last year that he was cut? I don't remember, but so if McKivitz goes down, or if he's not the guy, or if Trent Williams goes down, then is Jalen Moore going to be able to hold up? I'm worried about that. And then everybody's favorite, Jason Poe, only allowed 1 pressure, but from what I kept reading, because I'm not a film breakdown guy,
Right.
that's just
Yeah.
not my strength. But from some of the ones that I watched and heard from, that they said Jason Poe looked terrible. So even though he really didn't allow only the 1 pressure, but it sounds like he wasn't very good.
Jason Poe's a curious case because, like, to me, like, he flashes sometimes in camp. Like, there'll be times where he looks good, and you're like impressed because he's so small, and you're like, wow, he can do that, but he's doing like probably like the bare minimum. Like, he's just winning a rep, and you're like very impressed because he's like so small and he shouldn't be able to do this.
Yeah.
But like, I think that's why people root for him, because he's like,
Yeah.
he's kind of the underdog in the competition there, and intriguing because he had that pre-draft video last year that everyone kind of gravitated towards.
Mhm.
So I think that's why he got a lot of fans. But yeah, he's a curious case because I saw the same things, Mark, where people were saying like he's not very good. And so I guess I'd be open to, them maybe bringing Poe later in the game, as opposed to, because I think he started last week's game, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, there were times where he looked rough, as did most of the offensive line to start. They settled in. I think, Yeah, I don't know. I would roll Poe out there, I think, another week to start. Assuming that the starter okay, I'll put him out there with the second string. I'll say that.
Yeah.
And just see how he does once again. And, I think we just maybe need a bigger sample size with Poe to know for sure. That could be said for some of the other guys too. But I think Poe,
Right.
is kind of teetering that line still where you're not really sure where he falls. Whereas some guys have just been straight bad the whole time. So I don't know. I think I'm going to give Poe another shot. We'll see how he does on Saturday, but definitely you'd want to see a little better performance. But yeah, I mean, I think the concern on depth is legit. As people say, that's true across the board in the NFL. I mean, like there aren't that many good offensive linemen, and that's why you see any offensive lineman who's a starter who hits the free agent market, they get paid because there aren't too many out there. We just saw Mike McGlinchey get a really good payday, and we all know how this fan base felt about him, right? So the level of play for offensive linemen is just not that high, or it's very top heavy, I would say. So it's tough. It's tough. The one thing I will say is for people to not, I guess, panic about the depth. For one, most of the starters, it's going to be about the same as last year. And it ended up being a pretty solid unit, even despite there being 3 new starters last year, right? And so I think with most of those guys being the same, except for Colton McKivitz was still on this team last year. So he's not exactly new either. He's just new to the starting rotation. So I think that helps too. But also, if one guy gets hurt on the line, that one individual player that's going to fill in for that spot, you might be, clenching a little as you watch him play out there. But the offensive line, when it comes to like game planning and actual games being out there, it's a position of like unison more so than anything else. And
That's
so
true.
I think that some of them can mask the deficiency of others, and also this scheme and how, Kyle Shanahan, especially the run game, how some of those plays are drawn up, as long as they get the timing of everything correct and their angles correct, I think they can mask some of these guys not being the best at what they do.
Yeah, I just think that maybe, and I don't want to speak for 49ers fans, but just for me, we had Montana Young, and then followed that with 4-time Pro Bowler and Jeff Garcia. And so we're picky with quarterbacks, and that's why we have the drama that we have, because we have such a rich heritage when it comes to quarterbacks. And I think that maybe it's similar in a way with our offensive line, because we've seen like those teams in the 80s and 90s that won those Super Bowls had really good offensive lines. None of them really were Hall of Famers. Maybe some of them should be, but they didn't have the Larry Allens and the kind of guys like that, like the Cowboys, how they had just one great player, one Pro Bowler after another in the 90s. But then we look at even Jim Harbaugh's 49ers. That team obviously was known for the defense, but it was really built around that offensive line, and that offensive line was great. And so, now we look at Kyle's, and there has been a lack of greatness at the offensive line. But I think, like you said, he's able to scheme around that. But the problem with that, to me, has come late in those big games, like late in the Super Bowl when they had to move the ball because they already gave up the lead, late in the NFC Championship game against the Rams when they had to move the ball, and all of a sudden the team that Aaron Donald can't do anything against, now they can't block him. And then we look at the Philly game in the NFC Championship game. So those big games against really good defensive fronts where they have to block them in big moments, they haven't been able to do that. So even though he's been able to work around that throughout the season and even into the playoffs, in the biggest moments, the offensive line has failed. And that could be why the quarterback has failed in those situations.
That's very true. I mean, there's only so much you can do to mask, some of the disadvantages of your offensive line. And, when it comes to playing, those really good defensive lines as but it seems like all of the playoff teams, at least the ones who go deep in the playoffs, have really good defensive lines. Yeah, you're
Mhm.
going to run into some problems, and
Yeah.
uh,
Right.
as will the quarterbacks, as did Brock Purdy. But speaking of the quarterbacks as a whole, like what are you looking for from the quarterbacks that play in this game? Even Brock, if he's out there.
With Brock, I'm not worried about the interceptions in camp. That doesn't concern me too much. I know that in camp they tend to take more risks and try things that they normally don't try. In a similar way, like a pitcher in spring training might try out new pitches. And so I don't worry too much about that. If we get into September and we can see, man, he's lacking some zip on the ball, and it's related to that injury, then I'm really going to be worried. But at this point, by all accounts, the ball looks fine coming out of his hand, so I'm not too worried about him. If he plays, for me, it's more like, hey, let him get in a rhythm, break off some rust, and stay healthy. With Sam Darnold, gosh, I'm just so torn on him because I want to root for the guy,
Yeah.
but I think I'm just really invested in Trey, and so I don't want to see Sam Darnold because we've seen him. Now that doesn't mean he can't be successful now, but I guess I tend to not believe in him as much. But again, this is his first time with us, so we don't know exactly what we have. We know what we've seen, but we don't know what Kyle can do with him. But for me, I would be fine if Trey Lance started and finished the game, just because I think that they've got to figure out what they have in him, and he needs to play. I feel like it was unfair. What he's been through this week has really been unfair because, and I got blasted yesterday. I wrote an article on that I think Michael Lombardi needs to apologize to Trey Lance for what he said yesterday. Not because he was being critical, but because it just seemed personal.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it wasn't, but that was just how I took it. And so I got butchered for that. Why can't they criticize Trey? Was he a baby? And, all this stupid stuff. And so it's not about that. It's about the fact that he was pressured on half of his dropbacks last Sunday. And so he didn't have much of a chance. When he did have a chance, yes, he didn't look great. There was that one to Ross Dwelly out to the left flat that just looked terrible. He way overthrew him. But he's coming back from an injury as well. So he's not the only one that was probably rusty. And he's barely played. And I just think he needs all the reps that he can get. And so you look at the practice reps from yesterday, and they said that Sam Darnold was like 1 for 7 or something like that. Trey was 3 for 3 because he played like 4 snaps. And so I don't understand that. Now, I'm not going to challenge Kyle because he knows more than I'll ever dream of knowing. But to me, I think that we have to see more of Trey. And if I was the coach, I'd want to see as much as I absolutely can.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it was Grant who brought up the fact that both Lance and Darnold have the same agent. Like I should fact check that, but I'm pretty sure.
I think that was Grant. I remember seeing that.
And if that's the case, then like this whole like fairly even split of like in camp and in practice, the games, like it makes sense because like if you're an agent for both of these guys, you want to be like, okay, give them a fair shot, the same like amount of opportunities, So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Maybe that's why they're kind of like towing that line. But I'm with you. I would want to see Trey Lance get more of those opportunities just because I don't think we haven't seen what he is. And especially in these games, he needs those opportunities because as we saw, there's so much that is different from games to practice. He needs the practice experience. Like he was hesitating on some of those, open guys, a small window of opportunity to throw the football, but he has to let it rip, as Kyle Shanahan has been saying. So some of those things that he needs to work on, he can only improve on in these games, in these
Mhm.
preseason games. He's clearly not going to, start in the regular season. And I 100% understand why he's not. Brock Purdy
Right.
earned that. But, this is the time, the only opportunity he's going to get to show if he can improve or not. Give him those opportunities. So I don't know. Like you know what you have in Sam Darnold. I understand that he's new to the team, so acclimating to the offense and getting into the rhythm of the offense. Sure, you want to see what he can do, but at a certain point, like, why are you taking those reps away from Trey Lance, who needs the reps for you to know what he is? We already know what Sam Darnold is, right? So it feels a little backwards. I understand that they're trying to do this very 50-50 fair thing, give both of these guys the same amount. And I've actually been impressed by how even it's been, not just from the amount of opportunities each quarterback has gotten or snaps, but also the competition has been like close enough. Like there's some times where Trey Lance feels like he has an edge. Then there's other times where it feels like Sam Darnold has a slight edge, but like never a large enough edge where you're like, that's the QB2. Like I don't think either guy has shown or given enough confidence for Kyle Shanahan to say like, that's our backup, that's our guy. And so I think at this point, these next two preseason games are so important in determining who that guy is going to be. And it's going to be a tough decision. So I think I would rather see Trey Lance, because at the very least, or have a better idea what you have or could have with him. So
yeah, and I still don't buy the thing where they're going to be, and Alberto's right, and especially if there are trade rumors about trading him. That's what I was going to say. I still don't think they're going to trade him. Now, I know that a lot of people think that, and I could be wrong, but if they're planning on trading him, I think they're doing a terrible job of building up his trade value. But who knows? I mean, the big caveat is the fact that they signed Sam Darnold. What was it? Was it the first day of
it was like the first
agency?
day. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I understand that there was, hey, we don't know what Brock Purdy's going to look like. We don't know what we have in Trey Lance. And so maybe they told him, hey, you have a really good shot of being the starting quarterback, because he had been a starting quarterback. Why would he want to come and be a number 3 somewhere or have to compete for a number 2? If he's coming, he's thinking that he has a chance to be the starter. That's my feeling. But maybe somebody told him, look, you're a reclamation. You need to go somewhere like San Francisco and let Kyle Shanahan build you back up, and then you can go sign somewhere else. Maybe that was the whole thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that. Obviously, Sam Darnold came out here to compete or have a chance to be the QB1. And I think that was only when the future of Brock Purdy and when he'd be available to come back was still kind of cloudy. Once Brock Purdy was cleared and he was ahead of schedule and all that, I think that went out the window. So suddenly Sam Darnold's competing for QB2 with Trey Lance. And I think like that's why I kind of am speculating that they've had to keep it even, just because Sam Darnold signed here because he thought that he was going to be competing, for a roster spot or for QB1 or now QB2. So I don't know. Like, do they feel like they owe that to him? I feel like they should feel like they owe Trey Lance some more opportunities, before shipping him off. And I agree with you, Mark. Like, the closer we get to roster cuts, the more I'm thinking they don't trade him. Like, it's weird, because this whole time I've been like, yeah, they're definitely going to trade Lance at some point. They already have Brock. They're comfortable with Brock. But I don't know. I still feel like there's the fear, or in the back of their mind, they're thinking about everything that happened last season or the last 2 years, because like they had the same issues with Jimmy Garoppolo and health, and they always felt like they needed to have, good depth behind him. And when Trey Lance was set to start last year, they brought Jimmy Garoppolo back, I think for that same reason, because, Trey Lance was also dealing with his injury too, that he was trying to play through with the finger injury. But, nothing was guaranteed. So they brought back Jimmy Garoppolo, and, lo and behold, they needed all of those guys, and they went through all of those guys till the very end, right? So I do feel like some of that is going to play a part in them wanting to have their top 3 quarterbacks on the roster. And I think that's probably, Trey Lance and Sam Darnold in that picture as well. It wouldn't even shock me if they kept all 4 of them like that, because I think they like Brandon Allen too. Like, it's just so weird. Could they justify that? Could they afford to do that? That I don't know. I think in a perfect world they would like to keep all 4 because they think that highly of them. But yeah, I don't know. The closer we get, I don't think that Trey Lance will be traded, at least not, before cuts or shortly after. So it'll be interesting to see what they do.
Well, and Brandon Allen's another example. I mean, he was number 2 in Cincinnati for a while. And so why would he come to San Francisco to be number 4? When he probably could be the number 2 guy somewhere else, or at worst a number 3, but he comes to San Francisco to be the number 4. But, I think that we've seen over the years that coaches will sometimes say things to get players to do things. I remember Steve Young saying, he's told the story, and I think this was in his book as well, that Walsh brought him to San Francisco and said, look, Joe hurt his back. He's not going to be able to play. And so you're going to be the guy. And Steve shows up like for the first day of practice, and here walks out Joe. And Steve looked at Walsh, and Walsh goes, so I don't know, if Joe just miraculously got better or what that was, but it's kind of funny that things work out that way. Probably not for Steve, or in this case, Sam or anybody else.
At the end of the day, it's a business, right? So you gotta make sure you keep some good cards in your hand at all times. And so I think that's what it's going to come down to. And so I don't know. I don't know what they decide to do. It's a mess. It's a tough decision, but
yeah,
hopefully I just hope Trey Lance gets an opportunity, like, at some point. There is no guarantee either that Brock Purdy's going to be healthy the full season. Do I want him to be QB1, Brock Purdy? Yeah, like, he deserved that. Should anything happen to Brock Purdy in season, I want a solid, like, backup to be able to, if Brock's, God forbid, out the rest of the year, someone's going to come in and be able to do what Brock did last year, right? Ideally, in a perfect world. So I don't know. It's a weird situation. I hate that we have to like talk about it so much, but it's so interesting, and I love getting other people's opinions on it because it isn't a black and white situation. There's so much nuance, and people have like different takes and perspectives on it. So I just love to hear it. But Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. I definitely enjoyed this episode. And once again, like, the Hall of Fame case for Roger Craig, the link to his series is in the description of this video. So make sure you guys check that out after this. And Mark, anything else you got coming up you want to share?
You know what? I just got asked to do to come on board with a new app called PSF, stands for Pro Sports Fans. And what they're doing is they're putting together people like us to be on there and do some live streams, and do some live streams during games where we not only chat with fans, because there's a chat room, but they can actually come into the stream and talk with us. And so basically you're just hanging out together and talking during games. And then there's probably like a midweek stream. So go check that out, PSF, Pro Sports Fans. And I think it's going to be a pretty cool thing. They're already bringing in some 49ers content people. Nice. So yeah, PSF is the name of the app. It's already on Apple, and I think this week it's supposed to be on Android as well.
Awesome. Well, also make sure you follow Mark on his socials at 49ers Camelot, same name under YouTube and Twitter. And so, yeah, Mark, thanks for joining me today. All you guys tuning in, thanks for watching. Make sure you give this a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not yet. But for now, have a good rest of your Friday, folks. Enjoy the game tomorrow. Peace.
Yeah, go Niners.